Assalamualaikum and good day everyone. We are Group 1 from ELS254 and today we are going to present our collaborative poetry translation and analysis project. My name is Nur Anisra binti Zaki and I am the researcher and moderator for today.
My name is Ainu Shafika binti Kamaruzaman and I am the lead translator for today.
My name is Nuidina binti Zainal and I am the translator for today.
My name is Nur Betrisha binti Muhammad Nur Hisham and I am the translator reviewer and editor.
And my name is Aisha Humaira binti Ahmed Faizal and I am the literary analyst.
For this assignment, our group worked together to translate an English poem into a Malay while also analyzing its literary elements and discussing the translation strategies we used throughout the process. Each member has proposed a different English poem. We then discussed every poem together before selecting one that we believe that is the most suitable for translation and analysis. After considering the cultural relevance, richness of literary device, and complexity of figurative language, we reached a consensus and selected A Smile to Remember by Charles Bukowski. Throughout today's presentation, we will cover first the background of the poet and the poem, second, our collaborative translation process, the third, the final Malay translation, fourth, the translation strategies and justification behind our choice, and five, a literary analysis of the poem, and then finally, we will share our reflection of what we learned from this collaborative project. Then, without further delay, let us begin. So first, before beginning the translation process, our group has completed the poem selection stage. According to the project instruction, each member has proposed one English poem and explained why they thought it would be suitable for translation and literary analysis. Our selected poems were Ainu Shafika, the lead translator, has chosen The Thing Is by Alan Bass. Noor Edina, the translator, has chosen Talking to Grief by Dennis Levertov. And Noor Betusha, the translation reviewer, has chosen Song by Adrian Rich. And Aisha Humaira has chosen Hope is the Thing with Feathers by Emily Dickinson. And me, Noor Anisraya, the moderator for today, has chosen A Smile to Remember by Charles Bukowski. After introducing our selected poems, we discussed each one collaboratively. So first, I will be giving to Aina Shafika to talk about her choice of poems.
Okay, thank you, Anis. So for me, the poem that I selected was The Thing Is by Alan Bass. This poem focuses on themes of loss, healing, and acceptance. It shows how a person slowly learns to move on after experiencing sadness or emotional pain. The poem uses simple but meaningful language and imagery to express the speaker's feelings. However, many of the emotions are implied rather than directly stated. Because of this, translating the poem into Malay can be challenging. We need to make sure that the meaning, tone, and emotions of the original poems are still clear in the translated version. And that's all from me.
So as for me, the poem that I proposed was Talking to Grief by Dennis Levertov. This poem presents grief through the use of extended personification, where grief is portrayed as a homeless dog waiting outside the speaker's home. Instead of treating grief as something to avoid, the poem encourages readers to acknowledge it, accept it, and make space for it as part of life. I choose this poem because it explores universal themes of loss, healing, acceptance, and emotional resilience. Although the language is relatively simple, the poem carries deep emotional meaning to its symbolism and metaphor. Whereas for the translation perspective, the poem is interesting because many expressions suggest the comparison between grief and a homeless dog cannot be translated literally without losing their emotional impact. The translator must carefully preserve both the symbolic meaning and the gentle, reflective tone of the original poem. However, after discussing it as a group, we agreed that the poem's heavy reliance on symbolism and personification would make it more challenging to translate accurately into Malay while maintaining its poetic effect. Therefore, although it is a beautiful and meaningful poem, we decided to select A Smile to Remember by Charles Bukowski as it better fulfilled the assignment criteria for the translation and literary analysis. That is all from me.
Patricia, how about you?
Okay, so for me, the poem that I proposed was sung by Adrian Rich. This poem uses lyrical language and many poetic expressions. However, the abstract style leaves room for many interpretations. So our group agreed that maintaining both clarity and poetic beauty in the Malay translation would require considerable adaptation.
Okay, as for me, I proposed Hope is the Thing with Feathers by Emily Dickinson. This poem is very famous for its extended metaphor and symbolism. It also offers excellent opportunities for literary analysis, especially in discussing hope and resilience. However, because of its highly figurative language, um, different readers may interpret the poem differently and it is quite difficult, making the translation more complex.
And then finally, I have proposed A Smile to Remember by Charles Bukowski. Among all the poems that discusses, this one stood out because of its emotional impact and relatively accessible language. Although its vocabulary is simple, the poem actually contains powerful symbolism, irony, imagery, and emotional contrast. It also is explore important issues such as family abuse, childhood trauma, psychological suffering, and emotional survival, which make it highly suitable for both translation and literary analysis. So, after discussing all five poems, our group reached a consensus and selected A Smile to Remember by Charles Bukowski. Our decision was based on the three criteria stated in the assignment instruction. Firstly, cultural relevance. Although the poem is set in a Western context, the emotion, family relationship, and experience of hardship are universal and can easily be understood by even by Malaysian readers. Second, complexity of figurative language. The poem contains symbolism and metaphors that require interpretation rather than literal translation. And finally, richness of poetic device. Bukowski effectively uses symbolism, imagery, irony, emotional contrast, and repetition to convey the emotional struggles of the family. Overall, we believe this poem would best demonstrate our translation skills as well as our literary analysis. Now, let us move on to the background of the poem. Can I ask Shah to lead for the poet background?
Now I will presenting about the poet background. So, Charles Bukowski was an American poet, novelist, short story writer. He became well known for portraying the harsh realities of ordinary life through simple yet emotionally powerful language. Many of his works focus on themes such as loneliness, suffering, poverty, violence, family conflicts, and survival. Rather than using decorative or complicated language, Bukowski preferred a straightforward writing style that allowed readers to experience emotion directly. Many of his poems are also autobiographical. They were inspired by his own difficult childhood, particularly his experiences of domestic violence and emotional neglect. So understanding Bukowski's background helped our group appreciate the emotional honesty of this poem. And as translators, we realized that preserving the emotional impact was more important than translating every word literally.
Okay, so for the poem background, A Smile to Remember tells the story of a young boy named Henry who grows up in a violent and dysfunctional family. Throughout the poem, Henry's father repeatedly abuses both Henry and his mother. Despite living in fear, Henry's mother constantly encourages Henry to smile and remain happy. One of the most important symbols in the poem is the goldfish. So the goldfish endlessly swim in circles inside a bowl, representing emotional confinement and helplessness. And then later on, when the fish dies, they symbolize the emotional destruction experienced by the family. And another important symbol is the mother's smile. Um, at first, her smile appears comforting and hopeful, but as the poem progresses, readers realize that the smile actually represents silent suffering, endurance, and emotional suppression. Um, so, this emotional contrast became one of the main challenges during our translation process.
Uh, Whereas for me, before translating the poem, our group carefully read the original version together several times. And during our discussion, we focus on understanding the literal meaning, the emotional tone, the atmosphere, the symbolism, and Bukowski's writing style. We then divided the poem into different sections in which each member will translate their translation independently before combining the translations into one complete version. So one of the biggest challenges was maintaining Bukowski's simple writing style while preserving its emotional intensity and certain expressions such as poor fish and the repeated references to smiling require interpretation rather than direct translation because their meaning extend beyond the literal words.
So after completing our individual translations, we combined them into one document. Next, we conducted a peer review session. During this stage, every member provided constructive feedback on grammar, vocabulary, sentence flow, poetic tone, and accuracy of meaning. One of our biggest discussions involved the title. Initially, we translated it as Senyuman untuk diingati. However, after discussing the emotional tone, we decided to change it to Senyuman untuk dikenang. The word dikenang carries a deeper emotional and reflective meaning compared to diingati, making it more suitable for the melancholic atmosphere of the poem. We also revised several lines to improve naturalness while preserving Bukowski's restrained writing style. So, several translation decisions were made collaboratively. Firstly, we changed kami mempunyai ikan emas to kami memelihara ikan emas. This sounds more natural in Malay and better reflects the emotional relationships between the family and the fish. Secondly, we revised bergelut dengan kemarahan to sementara kemarahan bergelora. This better reflects the father's uncontrollable emotional state rather than suggesting that he was consciously fighting his anger. Next, we translated My Mother, Poor Fish as Ibuku Ikan Yang Malang. This preserves Bukowski's original metaphor by directly linking the mother to the helpless goldfish. And finally, we deliberately avoided adding unnecessary emotional emphasis. For example, instead of translating the final line as Ibuku hanya tersenyum, we chose Ibuku tersenyum. This reflects Bukowski's understated writing style, allowing readers to experience the sadness without excessive explanation.
Um, Then, this slide presents our final Malay translation after several rounds of collaborative editing and peer review. After each member completed their assigned section, we combined all the translations into one complete vision. We then carefully reviewed the entire poem together, discussing our word choices, sentence structure, and how well the translation reflected the original meaning and emotional tone. Through this collaborative process, we made several revisions to ensure that the final version was accurate, natural, and stylistically consistent. Our objective was not simply to translate every word literally. Instead, we wanted to produce a translation that would allow Malay readers to experience the poem in a way that is as close as possible to the experience of reading the original English version. Therefore, we focus on preserving several important elements of the poem, such as the emotional atmosphere, so that readers can still feel the sadness, tension, and emotional weight experienced by Henry and his mother. Then the symbolic meaning, especially the symbolism of the goldfish and the mother's smile, which represents emotional suffering, helplessness, and endurance. And then the rhythm and flow of the poem by choosing words and sentence structures that sound natural in Malay while maintaining Bukowski's simple and restrained writing style. So throughout this project, we realized that poetry translation involves much more than converting words from one language into another. Every translation decision requires careful consideration of meaning, culture, and literary style. For example, some expressions could not be translated directly because doing so would reduce their emotional impact or make them sound unnatural in Malay. Instead, we selected words that conveyed the same meaning and intentions as the original poem while remaining faithful to Bukowski's writing style. Overall, this process taught us that a successful poetry translation requires both linguistic accuracy and literary sensitivity. As translators, we must understand not only what the poet is saying, but also how the poet wants readers to feel. By balancing meaning, emotion, and poetic expression, we were also able to produce a final translation that we believe remains faithful to the spirit of the original poem.
Alright, so now let's move on to the literary analysis. One major theme is domestic abuse. As you can see in the poem, the father's repeated violence creates an environment filled with fear, pain, and instability. Another theme is psychological trauma. Although the mother continues smiling, her smile actually does not represent happiness. Instead, it becomes a survival mechanism that helps her endure the suffering. Bukowski also employs several literary devices. The goldfish can be seen as a metaphor for both the mother and Henry. Their endless movement inside the bowl symbolizes emotional imprisonment and helplessness, where they can't escape the abuse. And the fishbowl symbolizes limitation and the inability to escape an abusive environment. The death of the goldfish serves as foreshadowing, hinting at the emotional destruction occurring when within the family. And finally, the poem uses irony. Although the mother constantly encourages Henry to smile, both of them continue living in pain. So this contrast makes the ending especially very heartbreaking. And that is all from me.
So now we will move on to the reflections. So for me, this project taught me that successful translation requires understanding emotions and context instead of translating every word directly. And I also realized that translating poetry can be challenging because poems often contain figurative language, imagery, and emotional expression that may not have direct equivalents in another language. So, what about you, Ina?
Whereas for me, I learned that literary devices such as symbolism and imagery greatly influence translation choices.
For me, receiving peer feedbacks actually helped improve not only our language accuracy, but also the emotional quality of our translation.
Okay, so as for me, this project showed that metaphors and symbolism can completely change the interpretation of a poem. So, in my opinion, that's what makes a poem very interesting when you are trying to translate.
So, from my point of view, overall that I learned that literary skills are actually essential for translators because figurative language requires sensitivity to emotion, culture, symbolism, and the writer's intended message. Now we have finally reached the end of our meeting. So, in conclusion, this project has shown us that poetry translation is much more than changing word from one language into another. It requires careful interpretation, literary understanding, collaboration, and critical thinking. By working together, we have exchanged ideas, reviewing one verse another word, and then we gain a deeper appreciation of both translation and poetry. I hope that our presentation has demonstrated the importance of perceiving not only meaning but also emotion and artistic expression when translating literary texts. Thank you very much for your teamwork and efforts. And now, will anyone have any question?
No.
Mm,
None
nice.
from me.
So that will be the end of our meeting. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you,
Thank
you.
you.
everyone.